Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon. This is Maria Brindelmeyer with YouthPower Learning. Welcome to our webinar on strategies for engaging youth refugees, lessons from Niger. And we are excited to have a great topic and a great speaker today. If you're new to our YouthPower Learning webinar series, just a few words about what YouthPower Learning is. It's a 5-year program funded by USAID and focused on positive youth development, which we have defined as PYD programs are programs that recognize a youth's inherent assets. So we aim to develop those assets, which can be skills. We also recognize the need to have agency, the ability to contribute, and the need to surround the youth by an enabling environment. And so our programs and what we are presenting also on our website focus on this positive youth development concept and principles. So just a few activities that we are engaged with and that you can join us on. One is you can share resources. Obviously, you can access them on youthpower.org. You can find events information there. You can also send us information if you want to post something. Look at the What Works section. There are different kind of What Works sections. One of them is focused on youth in peace and security. We have developed a measurement toolkit that focuses on indicators for positive youth development. We are in the process of developing a positive youth development learning agenda. So if you are not already part of our community of practice, please join one of our communities of practice and you'll hear more about the learning agenda. And last but not least, we have our communities of practice. 4 of them, one on gender and positive youth development, one on youth engagement, and one on cross-sectoral skills for youth, and then obviously the one that is also focused on peace and security. And so today's webinar is focused or co-organized by the Youth Engagement Community of Practice together with our Youth in Peace and Security one. And with that, let me introduce you to Sarah Sladen, who is the co-champion for our Youth Engagement Community of Practice.
Thanks, Maria. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us. As Maria shared, the YouthPower Youth Engagement Community of Practice is a forum for sharing resources and experiences among practitioners, researchers, youth leaders, and others concerned with engaging youth in the design, implementation, and evaluation of development programs. Our community of practice goals are to contribute to a shared definition of youth engagement for YouthPower, support the development of measurement indicators for YouthPower focused on youth engagement, creating a space for the sharing of youth engagement experiences and group problem solving, and finally to develop a clearinghouse of resources and tools on youth engagement and bring youth voices into YouthPower activities. This year, the community of practice is focused on how to engage especially marginalized populations, and so we're covering topics including LGBTQI youth, youth with disabilities, and youth refugees. Today's webinar explores the role of youth engagement in refugee-serving programs to help increase young people's capacity and agency to make decisions over the programs and policies that affect their lives. In Niger, the IRC is taking a multisectoral approach to refugee youth employment in Tillaberry and Diffa, combining education, protection, and livelihoods, and the project is moving into its second phase, focusing on opportunities for youth to engage in agricultural value chains. So today, we're going to learn a little bit more from IRC's work with youth refugees and discuss how these insights can inform programs elsewhere. The webinar will also reference tools that have been created to incorporate refugees in research. For this, we are pleased to welcome Tara Clerkin, Rural Livelihoods Officer with the IRC, to share a little bit more about her work. Tara will present some of the lessons from the program, and then we will open it up for discussion and questions following. So if you do have questions, please type them in the chat box below and we will gather these and reference them at the end. So with that, Tara, over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah. So I work with IRC in New York. I'm part of our technical unit for economic recovery and development. I've had the privilege of working with the Niger team both on their monitoring and evaluation and data collection apps, as well as their proposal development and the brainstorming process around how to take our work in Niger into the next phase. So excited to share some of that with you today. I'll start off with a global overview and big picture of IRC's approach to youth engagement, specifically for economic recovery and development projects. And then I'll dive into the case study with Niger, getting into the current context and how that's shifting, the integrated programming approach that we have right now, our ideas for future programming, and challenges that we need to address. So first, I'll just start off with that global overview. So the Economic Recovery and Development Unit focuses on 4 theories of change within IRC's 2020 strategy. We focus on basic needs, food security, income and assets, and use and control of resources. Where we see the most of our programming is inside of this income and assets. However, we do touch on all of them. Today we'll be focusing on the income and assets, where we're looking at employment and self-employment for youth populations. We support crisis-affected markets and market actors in 4 key ways. First, we provide finance and resources to both producers and consumers. We improve access to markets, both in terms of consumption and delivery. Cultivate knowledge and skills, again, for both the producers and the consumers. And strengthen institutions for consumption and delivery. We use a bundled services approach across all of our programs, not limited just to youth programming, where we combine capital support, whether that's in the form of cash transfers, whether unconditional or conditional, business grants, connections with microfinance or other financial services, with skill building, such as business skills, soft skills, life skills, social emotional learning, especially when we're working with youth, or vocational skills and very technical skill sets. We also work with the private sector to strengthen the institutions and the infrastructure of the markets in which we are working. And what does this mean for our approaches with youth? We use a youth business incubation approach that includes several different elements. So the ideal package would include these 4 elements that we have here. Some sort of vocational training or technical training, typically taught through local partners who have expertise in those areas, paired with our Learn to Earn curriculum, which is a business and entrepreneurship skills curriculum that we use. It's a suite of different lessons that we can pick and choose from and adapt to local contexts. We also are expanding that Learn to Earn curriculum right now beyond just business and entrepreneurship skills to include more robust social and emotional learning, as well as an agribusiness module as well. We then also will pair that with mentorship, whether that's through the IRC staff, setting up peer-to-peer mentoring relationships, or identifying local business mentors that can support the beneficiaries that we work with. And lastly, it's really important to have those financial resources. We find that making sure that there is a capital element to our projects, especially in the context that we work in, is really crucial to success. So we include business grants often, but we also look at supporting the development of pathways to formal financing, whether that's through informal VSLAs, SACOs, or directly linking to formal financial institutions. And so diving into the Niger case study and context. So I was able to work with the Niger team last June and spend some time there. I was mostly in Niamey, but working on the projects in Tillaberry and in Diffa, as well as Agadez. We started operating in Niger in 2013 in the health, education, livelihoods, protection, and emergency response sector. We have around 200 staff in Niamey and across Niger, and most of our projects are in Tillaberry and Diffa. A little bit of background about Niger. Most of the displacement is along the borders, but Niger also is a conduit for the migrant populations making their way to Libya to try to get onwards to Europe. So there are around 300,000 people displaced in the Diffa region due to Boko Haram. About 184,000 of those are IDPs. The rest are a mix of returnees from Nigeria as well as Nigerian refugees. Then on the Malian border, there's around 50,000 Malian refugees, mostly in camps in Tillaberry. And then there's 80 to 100,000 estimated migrants making their way across Niger through the road that goes through Agadez every year. So there's 3 different populations that we are working with. Today we'll mostly focus on the Malian situation, but the projects that we work with do target all 3 of these populations. So the situation in Niger is plagued by really protracted crises. It's a multi-year crisis that has been fairly stable but constant. So we have large populations of people that have been displaced, and it seems like they will be displaced for quite some time. There's a lot of damage to the local economy and environment by climate change. People typically who have been livestock and agriculture focused no longer can depend upon those livelihoods, or they need to learn how to adapt to their new environment. Erratic weather patterns have severely changed the production cycles. There's really high rates of malnutrition and food insecurity in this region. This obviously is caused by climate change, and the conflict. All of these things are very much interrelated. There's also very weak government institutions and low school enrollment, which means that you have a very large youth unemployment issue due to the high population growth, but they do not have the skills that they need to be employed. And there's also a real lack of formal employment opportunities. So not only are people not getting the skills in their education system that they need to be successfully employed, but there also are not those formal employment opportunities. And this last bullet point is very important for the context of our future planning in Niger. The government is planning on closing the camps where Malian refugees have been living in Tillaberry, which means that these populations will be dispersed in peri-urban, urban, and rural areas. Most of them are agricultural or come from agricultural backgrounds and will need to be integrated into the host communities as well as possible. So to date, we've had several rounds of PRM funding for a multi-sector integrated approach with work in livelihoods protection, education, and as well as health. In terms of our livelihoods work, we provide support for income generating activities in the form of in-kind inputs, agricultural inputs, cash grants, and ongoing business coaching. We also provide business skills training. As I said, we have this Learn to Earn curriculum. The Learn to Earn curriculum teaches, it's a youth-targeted business skill training that will go through how to conduct a market assessment and identify opportunities, how to plan your own business, as well as integrating life skills throughout that. We really have focused on this in the Niger context because there are so few opportunities for formal employment, whereas Learn to Earn is very much about self-employment. We also have started doing some more vocational training and working with local partners for that. In terms of protection, we have provided protection in GBV case monitoring and information dissemination, case management for extremely vulnerable populations in the camp, community-based protection in the form of women's action groups in the camps, as well as protection and mainstreaming across all of the different sectors. For education, we've really focused on rehabilitation of classrooms and latrine blocks, so there are the facilities. We've provided performance incentives for both students and teachers, started doing some awareness campaigns for parents, but on a very small scale, provided teacher training, and then also literacy campaigns for out-of-school youth. On health, we're providing reproductive health through capacity building for midwives, provision of maternal health care, preventative, antenatal, and postnatal as well as really broad community health messaging. In addition, we have WASH components with latrine construction in the camps, boreholes, and then community hygiene messaging. The main linkages that I will be focusing on in this presentation in terms of the benefits of the multi-sector integrated approach is through education and livelihoods. There are some connections between protection as well, but we have found that especially in terms of targeting our youth, it's important for us to work with the education team to identify those out-of-school youth and make sure that we're able to build their capacity through the business skills training, even if they are not in the formal school system. And so in this year so far, we have been reaching our targets, but I think it's important to just note how small scale some of the livelihoods programs are and how small this program is as we're looking to scale it up. We have provided entrepreneurship training to 400 beneficiaries, the majority of which are female, and over 50% of those beneficiaries have reported starting their own businesses within 6 months of receiving this training. The most common business types are mobile money agents, tailors, and market vendors have been reporting the highest monthly profit. It's not a lot. It's only around 42 USD. And that's something that we really want to look at. How can we help these youth identify more profitable business opportunities? And so some of the big challenges that we have been facing in this project is the short length of funding cycles. Our funding has been through PRM, which typically works on 1-year funding cycles, which makes it really difficult for us to develop programming that has any real long-term impact, especially when we are working with youth who we want to be able to mentor and provide that coaching to and that bundled service approach for multi-years. There's also a lack of focus, especially from the vocational training partners, on market relevant livelihoods opportunities. We want to make sure that the skill sets that are being given to that we are delivering are actually useful in the market, needed, and will result in a profitable business. One of the things that we've been focusing on is getting also women into non-traditional spaces. The low literacy, and I know I cited this earlier in terms of the low school enrollment is an issue with the youth population, and also that's connected to the vocational training resources that currently exist. A lot of them are focused much more on theoretical classroom style work, and the French education system in Niger is very focused on official prerequisites. And so a lot of the populations that we are working with who are very vulnerable, tend to be illiterate, are blocked from those vocational training programs because of this barrier. I cited this earlier as well, but there's a real lack of formal employment opportunities. We're very focused on self-employment through all of our livelihoods work. And as the camps are breaking up, we'll have to be focused on agriculture more and more, besides just like the inputs that we're providing for gardening. And that's something that we're also thinking through as we're looking into the next phase, is how we can help create more employment opportunities through structures other than just self-employment, so fostering development of more formal opportunities. There's also huge gender barriers for women in the livelihood sector. So for certain industries, obviously in agriculture, there's a lot of elements of the value chain in which women are not involved, and that tends to be the areas where women would actually be using and controlling resources. That's a huge focus for us at IRC, is how we can get the money in households in the hands of women, and encourage their ability to earn money for their families as well. And so as we're looking forward, we are looking at the opportunities for multi-year funding. Right now we're working with PRM on a 3-year grant that would expand this work quite a bit over many years, and we'd be able to work with the youth that we'd be targeting for those 3 years. Right now, about 30 to 40% of our beneficiaries are youth, and so we also want to increase that. I also cited earlier in my presentation that we're interested in market-based vocational training. So we want to work with local partners more and advocate to them to adapt their programming to be more relevant for the population that we are working with. So we want it to be adapted for a literate population. We want it to really be focused on practical on-the-job training rather than theoretical. And we want to look at ways that we can reduce those barriers to entry, like graduation certificates, etc. And then the last thing that I am most excited about that we will talk about is our idea for these youth farmers incubation hubs. So when we're thinking about how I mentioned earlier that the camps are being broken up, we see that we are anticipating that we have this population of 50,000 Malian refugees that is going to be dispersed into the Tillaberry area. We want to be able to provide opportunities for these unemployed, undereducated youth who aren't that interested in agriculture. This is a very common issue in rural communities. Agriculture is often thought of being the old way and not that profitable and not that interesting. So something that we have been working on is the idea of putting together these youth farmers incubation hubs that rather than focusing on farmer production, that we would be working with the youth on providing farmer services. So looking at what ICT services and innovations that we could foster in these camps or in these hubs, looking at things like simple things like soil testing services that you can do on a micro scale, weather services that you could have people sign up for SMS alerts, testing irrigation systems and rolling them out to populations, essentially functioning as not only a information hub for farmers, but also a tech and innovation hub that can deliver services. We also are looking at different value chain services like aggregation, marketing, being like the last mile delivery service for agro dealers, and being able to work with those agro dealers to help them reach certain populations as well. And that's where we would get into really robust private sector partnership integration there, where we'd want to be working within the existing framework with agro dealers, extension services, research hubs that are existing in the area to be able to not only have the youth be able to learn from those private sector companies, whether it's in the form of apprenticeships or just training, as well as be able to leverage those private sector services and help them to reach more farmers, as well as roll out these innovations. And so we are currently, that's actually what I will be in DC next week to do. We're working with a few different partners on workshopping this idea of putting together these youth farmers incubation hubs and what that would look like in terms of our project, what it would look like for us to set these up, and anticipating how the farmer population, as they disperse through the Tillaberry region, what that would look like. Some other main challenges that we are having and are looking at is how we can also bundle more services. And I know I saw this question, so I don't want to jump the gun too much, but how we can look at the social emotional learning component and integrate that more into not only the obvious entry point of the Learn to Earn curriculum and the training that we're providing, but how we can integrate that more into the mentoring component and the ongoing support that we are providing, how to equip the youth that have been through quite a lot, are often dealing with trauma, how we can equip them with the social emotional skills to succeed in life. So that is a big focus of ours, and that's something that we are working with the educational technical unit here at IRC on, as we are, and I know we are testing that right now in Cote d'Ivoire. We integrated the social emotional learning curriculum there, as well as in Jordan. So we'll hopefully have some good results on what the effects are of including more social emotional lessons in the business trainings. And that is it. I went a little bit quickly, but really eager to hear questions and ideas that everybody has and feedback.
Much, Tara, for the presentation. We have a number of questions, and I've tried to group these by theme, so maybe we can tackle them together. And others, if you have questions, please continue to type them in the chat box, and we'll try and capture them. So the first is related to health. There were a number of questions around this, and specifically how you bring in mental health components into the program. And then there was a specific question related to this about on the reproductive health aspects of the program, and including the provision of family planning contraceptives to adolescents and youth. And could you speak a little bit to some of the health pieces?
Yeah, so on the reproductive health side, I could flip through my results really quickly and see if there's any of that detail, but I am not on the health team, so cannot specifically speak to that. But in terms of the mental health and the psychosocial component, so in the current Learn to Earn curriculum, we do have a life skills section that is focused on conflict management and interacting with others and controlling emotions. And it's something that we have found that our staff very much, they always choose to include it, and that it's also something that we have gotten good feedback from in terms of participant surveys in our deployment of Learn to Earn. We have been using Learn to Earn, I believe, since like 2013 or 2014, so it's been a few years of us using this in a variety of different contexts and countries. And the process that we will go through is we have a generic curriculum that we have in Arabic, French, and English, and the local teams will adapt it, so they will translate it into another language if necessary, and they also will contextualize. So they will change the examples to be more relevant to that context. They will shift things if they need to be shifted to be most relevant for the target population. But coming out of this, we realized that there is a huge need for further social emotional learning and having that integrated throughout the curriculum and not just in these separate life skills lessons. So we have gone through, and we will be rolling it out after these initial pilot phases across all of the implementations of Learn to Earn, where throughout the lessons that are on topics like budgeting and like identifying a business opportunity and putting together a business plan, include more social emotional components. There's a variety of exercises. One thing that I've really enjoyed is that they have included even just simple things like breathing exercises at the beginning of a lot of the lessons. And we've received interesting feedback from our staff that they have also started doing those in their meetings. So I feel like we have a lot of opportunity and a lot of different contexts where we can use this content that we're creating.
Great. Thank you so much. We've got some good questions coming in here. There were a few that related specifically to cost and scalability. I know that Mike McCabe had a question around what was the cost per beneficiary and how are you kind of demonstrating the return on investment, particularly as you look forward. And then there was another question somewhat related to this on the monitoring of good practices for the replication and scale of the program. Could you speak a little bit to how you are managing the M&E piece of this, and specifically what indicators you're using to track youth engagement? And then maybe related to that, if you could speak a little bit to the cost per beneficiary. I know that's always a big question. Think about scale.
Yeah. Okay, so in terms of our M&E, we actually have a really great M&E team in Niger. They're fairly advanced, which is great. I was working with them last year on moving a lot of their systems over to ComCare, which is a mobile digital data collection platform. We have been using that in a variety of different ways. In terms of youth engagement, obviously, we're looking at simple metrics like attendance, as well as their satisfaction. And what I'm really curious about, and the indicators and results that I referenced in this presentation are from our third quarter report from this PRM, but this PRM round is finishing in July, so probably in August or September we'll be able to really dig into the data, but looking and comparing the different age groups, so being able to compare the engagement and the results that we've had in terms of beneficiaries starting businesses and profitability based on the different age groups, whether they are under 18 or under 35, will be really interesting. to us, as well as what types of businesses they're interested in. I know I cited that it's an upsetting to me, since I'm a agriculture like aficionado and obsessed person. It's really depressing that youth tend to be turned off by agriculture. And so that's something else that we're really interested in, is looking at the data of what the youth have been engaging in within the camp settings and the informal settlements, and how we can build upon that in terms of identifying those market opportunities. I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to have the cost per beneficiary right now, since we're not at the end of the PRM. I know for this project, it's a 1.2 million PRM across the 4 sectors. So it's across all 4. And the majority of that is going to the health team. The protection, education, and livelihoods components are quite small. But that is something that I think is always on top of mind. Our best use of resources team at IRC has a lot of thoughts about how to calculate this effectively. And we're hopefully, we're undergoing a process of making that something standard across all projects, and having it be more of a continuous metric that we're looking at.
Thanks a lot, Tara. And you talked about sort of segments of the market and training young people for different components, and noting in particular that there is a very tiny formal market for employment. There was a question around where those opportunities are for formal employment, and I think more broadly how you did the labor market assessment to identify where those opportunities are and adapt throughout the program.
Yeah, so we have a suite of market assessment tools. We use the Emma tool, as well as we have our own adapted tools that we use when we do market assessments, whether for value chain or labor markets, whatever the case may be. So it's a combination of market monitoring in terms and mapping in terms of just simple prices and seeing what is in the markets, as well as talking to those key informants and mapping out the different major actors. There seems to be the most opportunity in mechanics, which is not surprising considering the road to Agadez is so heavily traveled. And then really in agriculture, and in adapting agriculture for the changing climate and context. That's something where it's a very common refrain, and I do not think that is surprising to anybody on this call who has worked, especially in the Sahel region or in sub-Saharan Africa in general. Most farmers or people are very aware that they need to adapt and change their production and ag value chains in order to become profitable. So that's where we've really honed in on the ag component and on the Youth Farmer Innovation Hub idea specifically, because when we're thinking about how to roll out these innovations and adaptations, there's a real opportunity to make them ICT focused, innovation focused, and also like get youth excited and engaged in
So related to this focus on agriculture, there's sort of a 2-part question here. And the first is, how are youth being engaged in the development of new programs like the incubation hubs? And are there early examples that you could share for how you're doing that, and specifically some of the strategies you've deployed with these populations? And then within that, is there a gender dynamic here? Are you finding that more young women are interested in agriculture or more men?
So I will answer the gender dynamic question first. So that is a very complex question. So there typically, and this is true in Niger, and this is true in many other countries, women are interested in agriculture, and honestly the ones, like the stats vary, but they are providing most of the agricultural labor, but they just often are not as involved in the marketing components and the points at which in the value chain you actually are getting your hands on the money. So that's something where we're looking at how we can get women more involved in value chains that they have traditionally been blocked out of. So whether that is getting them involved in more cash crops or involved in processing and marketing, that is certainly something that we want to look at. in terms of youth, a lot of the youth that we work with in Niger specifically are male. Which I think is really interesting and challenging when we're looking at how we can make these programs gender sensitive and how we can encourage female participation, is how when the majority of the clients that we're targeting happen to be male, like how are we able to encourage those women to participate? Obviously, like we need to make sure that we are providing good maternal health services, make sure that we have good health education messaging to make sure women are capable of participating in the workforce, but that is a big challenge for us. Answering the question around how we are engaging the youth in this. So we have a couple projects where we are engaging youth in these like incubator-esque environments. In Cote d'Ivoire, we have right now we're starting an e-learning project. So we're doing this, we're just in the first year now, but so we are doing this same agribusiness, learn to earn, life skills, social emotional learning combo, all through tablets, and then are getting those youth involved in incubators and business support, but that's much more, not so much in terms of the innovation. This is something that we've been, the particular spin on this, where we're looking at the Youth Farmer Innovation Hub, this is new for us. And so this is something that we are trying to figure out what the best strategy is. I will say that I think that from experience in other countries and other work that I've done in general, the tech component is really important to getting youth interested. When we're doing like market assessments in several different countries around youth employment opportunities, and not even limited to youth, as well as when we're working with women, whenever you talk about technology components, that's when you get the focus groups most excited. And they seem to see the most promise in those. So I think that is something that we have identified as a flashpoint of getting more people engaged, is to emphasize that tech component. I think it's interesting. I think it makes people feel like they're moving and advancing forward rather than stay just like receiving the same type of trainings that they received.
And on the gender piece, you talked a little bit about enabling, creating a situation that would better enable young women to engage. How are you working with young men to be more receptive to women working in traditionally male spaces like in agriculture? Have you had some of those conversations with beneficiaries?
Yeah. So we have we have a lot of gender norms work across IRC countries, and especially in West Africa, we have these. So through our VSLA programming that our Women's Protection and Empowerment program uses, we use something called the EASE model, where we combine VSLA's business skills training, and then the third really important component is discussion groups. So in those discussion groups, the female VSLA member brings a male from their household, whether it is their spouse or their uncle or father or son, whatever it is. They bring a male from their household to those discussion groups, and we will facilitate these community discussions around gender norms and decision making. I also highly encourage people, if they are not familiar, to look at the GALS methodology. That is not something that IRC uses, but it's really, really impressive and a very robust approach to having community discussions around gender norms. So that is something that we will work into all of our programs. We also have started doing more programs targeting male beneficiaries around, like we have one in Liberia called Modern Man, where it's talking about gender norms, but working exclusively with men and talking about their role in society. So not doing it through targeting women specifically. We also I've identified that parenting classes are really important, and getting mothers and fathers together with parenting classes. So that is something that was a very, very, very small part of the education component, was the parent component in Niger. But that is something that we have been doing in other countries, is bringing in that parenting.
Great.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you're working, or you're there's 3 different youth refugee populations in this area, and I was wondering if you can say more about some of the differences and similarities between these 3 populations and some of the ways that IRC's adapted.
Yeah, so obviously the population of migrants is, I think, the hardest for us to engage with on a long-term basis for obvious reasons, right? They're a lot more transient. That population is mostly all young men. The majority of our programming in Agadez and with that migrant population is going to be cash transfers that are very much focused on basic needs and on food security. That is a huge difference. Is it's very hard to engage on a long-term basis with those populations because they are so transient. They are difficult to get to engage on an ongoing basis. So that's something that we have been looking at, especially when we're looking at these youth farmers hubs in the Tillaberry region. Is that we don't necessarily want to create reasons for the youth to stay with their families, the Malian refugee youth to stay with their families, to stay and not start migrating across the country because there are a lot of risks associated with that. So we have, so that is one difference in terms of like those 2 populations. In terms of the Diffa region, it's very, that context is much more similar to Tillaberry. It's just a different region of the country, and it's obviously a different threat. It's not going to be Al-Shabaab here. It is, or not Al-Shabaab. Yeah, it's going to be Boko Haram, and so that we actually, to be perfectly honest, have been proposing the exact same youth farmer hubs intervention to start there. And again, the same exact thing of really focusing on maybe like soil testing as the entry point there. So it's going to be a similar context, but just really a different region of the country and different climate risks. But I think there is a huge difference between the migrant population and these populations that are living in settlements. And something that we really want to do is incentivize the youth to stay and not leave their families in search of other economic opportunities.
Great, thank you so much. There was one education-related question, which was how effective are the performance incentives for students and teachers, and what do they consist of? Can you speak to the education component?
To be perfectly honest, I would not feel comfortable speaking for our education team in terms of the effectiveness. Let me just flip. I do have their 3rd quarter results. But of course, since it's the 3rd quarter, they have not reported on that. They said that they would report at the end of the project. That is something that I would be really interested in learning about too. I know that we do have higher. We're not necessarily meeting our target. We wanted to have less than 2% dropouts in the schools and learning spaces that we were supporting, but we have a 9% dropout rate. So that is higher than we anticipated. So you can extrapolate what we want from that. But I think that is something that it's something that we need to be looking at as we're evaluating this project and moving into the next space in the education sector, is how we can look to continue to improve that. I also, as I'm flipping through this, there seems to be some continued attacks in the zones that have prevented teachers from traveling to the camps, which is obviously going to impact that as well.
So you'll see that in our chat box, there's a couple of different links that we're with you now. Yeah. There's, you are, if you're not already a member of the community of practice, you can register. So we've put a link there. And then we've also included a suggested resource related to UNICEF's brief on research for the disadvantaged, vulnerable, and marginalized adolescents. So just wanted to reference, if you're looking for some resources, we can put them in the chat box and we'll share out this recording afterwards. We have a few more minutes, and so if you do have questions, feel free to type them in the box. But I wanted to ask Tara, you're coming into the 2nd phase of this program. You've learned a lot. You've clearly made some adaptations and are going in a few different directions based on what you've learned so far. From a youth engagement perspective, what are some of the sort of top 3 insights or open-ended questions that your team has as you look ahead to the next phase of this program?
I think that, and I had cited this earlier, I think making sure that the skills training that we're providing is relevant for the population. So I cited the low literacy, and working hand in hand with the education team in terms of targeting for those youth that are not in school, but still do need education services. So our Learn to Earn curriculum is designed for low literacy but not illiterate populations. In adaptations, we can use Learn to Earn as long as there's a couple semi-literate participants in the classes. But that is something that we are identifying as the need to adapt more of our resources for not just low literacy but illiterate populations. And likewise, adapting the skills training that we're providing to be much more theoretical on-the-job training as opposed to or practical, not theoretical, as opposed to being theoretical and in a classroom. So I would say the adapting to the literacy is one. Second, I will say the length of funding. So this is something that our team has been really frustrated by, and it makes it hard to plan for these big, ambitious projects where we're trying new methodologies when we are constrained by one-year funding cycles. So that's something that we as a team are looking to diversify our funding sources as well as the length of that funding so that we have more time to develop these ideas and execute them. I'm sure I am preaching to the choir, but it is very frustrating when you realize that you are just using the same methods year after year because you do not have time to innovate and because the one-year implementation cycle is not long enough to try new things. So I think that we're trying to create the space for us to be able to try new things and to scale up those things that do work. And then third, I would say, and this is where I think we have honed in on needing to focus on agriculture more, but really making sure that the skills that we're providing are relevant to the opportunities that are realistic in the market. And so looking at what technical skills are needed for opportunities that can actually be profitable, and where we shouldn't necessarily be training everybody in tailoring. There's a limited market for that. There's limited markets for certain skill sets, but there seems to be endless need for increased food production and ample opportunities along the value chain.
Great. Thanks so much, Tara. So if we don't have any other questions, we can wrap up a little bit early, but I wanted just to point out also that some of you have shared resources in the chat box, which we really appreciate. These will be posted on the website, and this recording, as we said, will be shared on youthpower.org. If you have follow-up questions for Tara, can folks contact you, Tara, with any follow-on questions? Great.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much again. As we said, one of the goals of the community of practice is to start to identify strategies for engaging at-risk youth populations in particular. So we really appreciate your sharing so much of the program and some of the lessons that you've learned with these different populations. And I think some very relatable challenges and opportunities here for everyone who participated. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Maria Brindelmeil. But thank you so much again, Tara, for sharing your insights today. We do appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Tara and Sarah. Very interesting and definitely lots of food for thought for us. So just to close it off in terms of what you can do next, I had mentioned, our website to both access resources. We will make sure that the ones that you have shared here will be also posted on the website. So if you have any other ones after the call, please feel free to send them to us. And if you're not getting our newsletter, just let us know, and we will be happy to add you to our newsletter. There's a request on our website where you can join. And we also will soon be announcing like in September, so relatively soon, announcing the awardees of our latest prize competition, which is about Young Women Transform, and we're currently getting the deliverables of last year's prize or grant awardees. And they are all focused on youth in peace and security topics and civic engagement. So be on the lookout for those resources. You can find them on youthpower.org. Thanks again, and join us for another webinar.